Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in our Chats with Emily, as we are calling our readings through all of the poems of Emily Dickinson contained in the Johnson edition. We turn now to poem 127, Houses, So the Wise Men Tell Me. Now, I find this a fascinating text for a number of reasons. Guys, we've already commented on the fact that Emily seems at times to struggle with the faith that she was raised with. She never got around to fully accepting it. And it's not altogether clear in this poem if she's being tongue-in-cheek or sarcastic or ironic, or if she's being actually quite literal. Now, the cool thing about this text is that it's derived from a transcript that was made actually by Miss Todd, that really important figure in Emily's life, especially in those last 5 years, as we've commented in earlier lectures. Of course, we're back then to Emily as theologian, no question, and her challenging or questioning about her theology. Now, our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net. Down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily is our playlist, and I'm hopeful that you've already been exposed to our introductory set of comments, where, for example, and Miss Todd will have been mentioned in other titles to follow. And we've worked through all of the preceding 126 poems, just finishing up with To Fight Aloud is Very Brave. Now, the background of this poem matters, and Emily's audience immediately would have understood it if she had had an audience to read it. In the King James Version of the Bible, the John 14 passage of 1 through 4, of course very famous, says, "Let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there ye may be also. And whither I go, ye know, and the way ye know." Now, this poem is going to use this set of lines, especially the word mansions. I want to point out to you, notice all the quotation marks in this poem. Notice the repetition of mansions 5 times. And notice that 5 times we will have exclamation points as well. Let's enjoy, and I enjoy, the tone of voice in a poem like this. Houses, so the wise men tell me. Mansions. Mansions must be warm. Mansions cannot let the tears in. Mansions must exclude the storm. Many mansions by his father. I don't know him. Snugly built. Could the children find the way there? Some would even trudge tonight. Now, I find it at times difficult to know exactly how to read these sets of lines to you guys. I don't know if I'm supposed to use my serious voice or my skeptical voice. For example, I could have read this with a very skeptical voice. Houses, so the wise men tell me. Mansions? Mansions must be warm. Mansions cannot let the tears in. Mansions must exclude the storm. Many mansions by his father. I don't know him. Snugly built. Could the children find the way there? Some would even trudge tonight. And you can tell by my second reading, this poem has a completely different meaning once you inject that skeptical, dare I even say it, relativistic position, epistemologically speaking. It may be the fallibilist position. Now we're back, of course, to our introductory set of comments. How you read this, I leave entirely up to you, but let's work through it. Notice we begin with quotation marks, houses, and then we've got the "so the wise men tell me." Now, it's interesting, a couple of things here, so I should just point this out to you. First of all, notice the wise men, okay, only used 1 time in all of her poetry, and it's here. But for those of you who are like, this construction we've heard already before, again, this is what's cool about reading these poems in the Johnson edition in order. Do you remember in poem 100 that she said, "A science, so the savants say," playing that game? When we get to poem 892, by the way, we'll get this construction one more time with "so they say." In other words, Emily, who's very educated, right? But she's always calling into question what she has been told. So here it's, notice, houses, houses, so the wise men tell me. Notice set off with these dashes, right? Because she's going to go from houses to mansions. In other words, the wise men tell me that really the houses that matter are the mansions. Now, again, it's fascinating to study the life of Emily as it relates to houses. Not only her house and her father's house, but of course her brother's house, and the whole Evergreens project, as we've commented in other lectures. In other words, there's an interesting tension about this notion of houses. Emily, who only ever knew really her father's house. And of course here we're going to get in my father's house, right? And so we're playing with this idea of fathers, and who do we know, who don't we know? By the way, notice it's not the wise man, as in Jesus Christ, John 14, but rather it's the wise man, right? And later we'll get to his father, and obviously we're referencing there Christ from the John 14 passage. Notice mansions repeated again and again, 5 times. Mansions must be warm. Well, there's irony here, obviously, because, hello, you die, and then you go to the mansions of John 14, right? Okay, so in other words, the concern about them being warm, or for example, no tears being allowed in. Mansions cannot let the tears in. By the way, did you remember the last line of 125? Bitter contested farthings and coffers heaped with tears. So obviously there's a part of her theodicy as well at play here. In other words, after a really, really hard life with lots of tears, the promise is you get to the mansions, John 14, 1 through 4. Notice, mansions must exclude the storm, exclamation point. In other words, the houses are for protection. But this mansion, obviously, is a different kind of protection. No more of the storms. Well, of course, again, ironic. The theory is of Christian theology, once you have passed, once you have died, you go to these mansions that Christ is promising in John 14, and there are no more storms, right? So, in other words, we don't have to worry about the storm. It's kind of self-evident, and yet here she says it. Then it's many mansions, right? And again, going back to the John 14 passage. And then it's by, and then quotation marks, his father. Obviously a reference here to Christ. And then she says, I don't know him. Now, that may be one of the most interesting single lines in any poem of Emily Dickinson, the I don't know him construction. You'll remember this I don't know him construction from poem 79, which we already messed with. In the poem 696 that I've referenced already a number of times with Acres of Perhaps, she says it this way: better than larger values that show, however true, this timid life of evidence keeps pleading, I don't know. Now, in this poem, the fallibilist position writ at large, it is in quotation marks. Here it's no quotation marks, just I don't know him. And then notice you have the phrase snugly built. Now, the fact that she uses the word snug and trudge, I mean, you can obviously hear the game that's being played there. But I'm interested with the use of the word snugly and then her use of the word children capitalized. Could the children find the way there? By the way, notice it's not their way, it's the way. Right? Christ, I am the way, the truth, and the life. It is a part of that same passage of John 14 later. Could the children find the way there? Dash. Some, comma, would even trudge tonight! Exclamation point. Now, the fact that she doesn't say could the child to reference herself, but rather the children, makes this a fascinating question. In other words, she could be speaking, of course, of the children of God, that is to say, Christians. And in this regards, how are we going to read this at 2a? What are the major messages here? Well, I think that one obvious message is that all humans long for relief, that is to say, a mansion, some way to postpone what? The tears, the storm, and the like. But it's at 2b that this poem for me is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I mean, think about the way in which this poem reads differently depending upon how you take the tone of voice. And I find that remarkable, right? At 3a, well, obviously, you've got the John 14 passage. At 3b, I'll just ask you guys, how do you read this poem? Do you read Emily as saying, I am ready to go to the mansion where I will finally have some relief? Or, in fact, she says, I would go, if I could figure out a way to get there tonight, I would get there tonight. Do you read the poem authentically that way? Or do you rather read it as, Emily's doing one of these numbers. Yeah, I know. I read this John 14 passage. I'm just not sure that it's everything it's cracked up to be with this whole notion of mansions after death and all of that. It is a fascinating question how you read the poems. Again, guys, I'm just teaching you these poems as best I can. You get to decide how you want to read them. Thank you.